Yeah, happy to be here. So we've been working on collecting data for a few months and training our models, and we are finally ready for SG. I think Chris has us some charts to look at to give us an example of how this applies to our current charts and how it can be correlated.
What we see here is sort of the raw data from one of our test setups. So I went ahead and plotted our SG value. And so I kind of wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about how these other graphs correlate with SG and sort of what additional insight they can provide over just a normal SG value. Bradley, so this is when you've made some fresh wort for us, right? And you probably just pitched right here.
Yep, exactly.
And so we're kind of in the lag phase, right?
Absolutely, we're in the lag phase.
So if we're just looking at SG values, it looks like there's nothing going on in there, right? That's what it looks like.
That is correct.
All right, so this pink graph down here that I've got labeled haze is either haze or clarity, kind of whatever we want to call it. And then this is our fermentation profile. So the fermentation profile is more of a general chemistry / activity graph, right? So we'll focus on sugars with this graph, all right? And this graph will talk about particulate that's in solution, particulate moving up and down in solution past our window, and how that kind of relates to what might be going on with the density changes. Right. So we're in lag phase here in SG. So it's technically lag phase, but that doesn't mean there isn't any activity. Right? So Bradley's pitched, this was dry yeast, right? On this one?
Yep, that's just London dry ale yeast that we sprinkled on top of a 2-gallon batch.
So we've got dry yeast sprinkled on top of our wort, right? So that's naturally going to start to absorb some of that wort, right? And as that dry yeast gets heavy, it is going to sink, right? And that sinking action is what causes this clarity value to increase. As our yeast gets, really damp and heavy and falls past the window, we start to see some small chemistry changes here. The big thing is we get this uptick in clarity as globs of yeast fall past the window and settle in the bottom of the fermenter, right? And so finally we reach sort of peak clarity or lack of clarity right at the end of lag phase, right? And so all that stuff's fallen, it's settled in the bottom, and now it's going to work, right? So now we start to see changes in the density. So the yeast are starting to convert some of that sugar. They're starting to kick up some CO2 bubbles, and we're starting to get some convection inside solution, things flowing up, things flowing down. What we end up with is a steady average increase in activity, right? So we get lots of things pushing up past the window, right? So as they're floating to the top and then settling back down out. We get up to this peak here, and this is the most intense area of fermentation as far as the yeast are concerned, right? Because this is the largest rate of change in our density value, right? So that's the speediest part of fermentation, right? So the yeast, they're all healthy, right? They're getting going, they're converting that sugar. And we tie that into kind of our sugar levels here. We see them start to trend downward, right? So our sugars are obviously going away as the yeast is consuming them, and we get to here, right? And you're probably close to final. What's final on this one? Like an 09. Yeah. So, if you're calling 09 your final, right? So there's not a lot of change going here with the SG, but we see still a lot going on inside the tank that isn't specifically density related. So we see these upticks in clarity again, and you might think, well, there's not a lot of yeast activity. Why would the beer get more turbid at this point than it was before? And this isn't really the total solution being turbid. This is striations or, Clausen or whatever you want to call it that was at the top, right? That is now settling back out and falling past the window. So your clarity value kicks back up, which means it's less clear, more turbid as things settle back out of solution due to convection and settle at the bottom of your fermenter. And one of the things to keep in mind is the way that Accubrew works is, there's a little window, right? And it measures everything that passes by the window. And it's not selective about what it measures, it just measures everything. Right? So here we're measuring clumps of yeast, whatever might be in there, particulates, and we're measuring all that chemistry as it passes by the window. But we can definitely tell right here that everything that was going past the window is gone past the window. Right? So we're now settling out and we're clarifying. And then we have our final taper here, and then we've got no further change here in our SG values. So even though we reach terminal, we still have all this other physical activity going on inside the tank.
Oh, that's really cool to be able to see that.
We look at this stuff all day, Brad, and we're like, oh yeah, that makes complete sense, but seeing it all together really does kind of solidify the process, right? So now, without being able to physically see what's going on in the tank with our own eyes, we can kind of look at this data and draw conclusions from it.